My wife thought she was the smartest person in the room. She thought a simple text message about a late-night client meeting was enough to cover her tracks. She thought I was just a clueless, workaholic husband waiting at home. But she didn't know one crucial detail. When she walked into that hotel rooftop bar, looking for her lover, she wasn't going to find him alone. I was already there. And I wasn't sitting by myself. I was sitting across from his wife. Welcome back to Inspiration Seeker. We share stories about relationships, betrayal, and the sweet taste of karma. If you enjoy stories where the truth finally comes to light, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and drop a comment below. It really helps us grow. Now, let's get into the story. I was stuck in the back of a yellow cab, watching the endless stream of red taillights bleed into the wet asphalt of Fifth Avenue. It was one of those typical gray Manhattan evenings where the city feels more suffocating than exciting. I was exhausted, not from work, but from the weight of the secret I had been carrying for weeks. That's when my phone buzzed against my thigh. The screen lit up, cutting through the gloom of the cab. It was a text from Elena. Honey, running late. Sudden crisis with a VIP client. We're meeting at the Crown Rooftop Bar to smooth things over. Don't wait up for me. Love you. I stared at the message. It was perfect. Too perfect. The grammar was precise. The excuse was plausible given her job in high-end real estate. And the love you at the end was a cherry on top, a little sprinkle of affection to keep the dutiful husband sedated. A year ago, reading that message would have made me worry about her stress levels. I would have probably ordered her favorite Thai food and had a glass of wine ready for her return. But tonight, those words just looked like a script she had rehearsed in front of a mirror. She didn't know that I wasn't heading home to our apartment on the Upper West Side. She didn't know that 2 large suitcases were already packed and hidden deep behind my winter coats in the walk-in closet. And she certainly didn't know that I wasn't a naive architect who spent too much time looking at blueprints and not enough time looking at his wife. I tapped the screen, turning it off. The reflection staring back at me wasn't angry. That was the surprising part. I expected rage. I expected to want to throw the phone out the window. Instead, I felt a cold, surgical precision. It was the same feeling I got when I inspected a building foundation and found a critical crack. You don't scream at the concrete. You figure out how to demolish it safely or how to fix it. In this case, there was no fixing it. The foundation of our marriage hadn't just cracked. It had been pulverized. The Crown Rooftop Bar, I whispered to myself. It was a bold choice. It was public, expensive, and romantic. Not exactly the setting for a crisis meeting with a client, unless that client's name was Julian and the business involved destroying 2 marriages at once. I leaned forward and tapped on the plexiglass partition. Change of plans, I told the driver, my voice steady. Take me to the Crown Hotel. Elena thought she was controlling the narrative. She thought she was a protagonist of her own exciting little romance novel. She had no idea she was actually walking into the final chapter of a thriller, and I had already written the ending. To understand why I wasn't panicking in the back of that taxi, we need to rewind the clock about 2 weeks. The collapse of marriage doesn't usually happen with a bang. It happens with a whisper, or in my case, a crumpled piece of paper and a lingering scent. It started on a Tuesday. I was looking for a breath mint in Elena's coat pocket while she was in the shower. Instead, I found a receipt. It was for a dinner at Luciano's, a dimly lit, incredibly expensive Italian spot in Brooklyn. The bill was nearly $400. Now, Elena makes good money, so the price wasn't the issue. The issue was that Elena notoriously despises Italian food. She complains about the garlic, the carbs, and the heavy feeling it gives her. Yet, according to the slip of paper, she had enjoyed a 4-course meal there on a night she claimed she was working late at the office. That was the first crack in the facade. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I'm an architect. I don't build arguments on shaky ground. I needed a solid foundation. The second clue was the smell. A few days later, I borrowed her car to run an errand because mine was in the shop. The moment I sat in the driver's seat, it hit me. It wasn't her floral perfume. It was a heavy, woody, distinctively masculine scent. Sandal 33. It's trendy, expensive, and completely unmistakable. I don't wear cologne, and certainly nothing that smells like leather and sandalwood. It was the scent of another man, stamped all over the leather interior of my wife's car. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband checking phone logs. I wanted professional, undeniable proof. The report had arrived on my desk just this morning. It was a thick manila envelope that felt heavier than a pile of bricks. Inside were high-resolution photos that left no room for interpretation. There was Elena walking through Central Park, but she wasn't alone. She was holding hands with a man, tall, sharply dressed, with a smug grin plastered on his face. They weren't looking at real estate contracts. They were looking at each other the way she used to look at me 10 years ago. Seeing those photos felt like a physical blow to the gut. I felt the air leave my lungs. But as I stared at the man's face, Julian, the report named him, something shifted. The heartbreak curdled into a cold, hard resolve. I realized crying wouldn't solve anything. Confronting her at home would just lead to gaslighting and denial. I needed a plan. I needed to dismantle her lies with the same precision I used to design skyscrapers. And looking at the PI's background check on this Julian character, I realized I had the perfect leverage. The private investigator's report didn't just give me dirt on my wife. It handed me a shovel to bury her excuses. As I flipped past the photos of Elena and her lover, I reached the dossier on the man himself. Julian. He presented himself as a high-flying venture capitalist, the kind of guy who threw around words like synergy and seed funding to impress women like Elena. But the report painted a very different picture. Julian wasn't the shark. He was a remora attached to one. He was married, and his wife, Sarah, wasn't just a housewife kept in the dark. She was a founder and CEO of a successful tech startup in the city. According to Financial Breakdown, she was the one pulling in the 7-figure salary, while Julian played pretend with her credit cards. I sat there in my office, staring at Sarah's LinkedIn profile. She looked formidable, sharp eyes, a confident smile, the kind of woman who doesn't tolerate incompetence. I realized right then that I didn't just have a fellow victim. I had a potential partner. I didn't want to call her and sound like a raving lunatic. I needed to be strategic. I crafted a message on LinkedIn, keeping it professional yet impossible to ignore. Ms. Sterling, my name is Mark. I believe our spouses are making fools of us both. I have concrete evidence that my wife, Elena, is seeing your husband, Julian. I'm not looking for money or drama, just the truth. If you want to see the proof, meet me at the Starbucks on 5th Avenue in an hour. I hit send and held my breath. It was a gamble. She could have deleted it, called me a liar, or worse. Tipped off Julian. 45 minutes later, I was sitting at a corner table in that busy coffee shop, nursing a black coffee that had long since gone cold. I checked my watch every 30 seconds. Just as I was about to give up, the door chimed. A woman walked in. I recognized her immediately from her profile, though she looked even more striking in person. She was wearing a tailored blazer and carried herself with rigid, almost regal posture. But as she scanned the room and her eyes locked onto mine, I saw it. Beneath the composure, there was a storm brewing. She didn't look like a woman who was about to cry. She looked like a woman who was about to go to war. She walked straight to my table, didn't even shake my hand, and simply sat down. "Show me," she said. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her handbag. That was the moment I knew I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. I slid the manila envelope across the small wooden table. It felt like I was handing over a loaded weapon. Sarah didn't hesitate. She opened it, her eyes scanning the photographs with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. She flipped through the pages, the dinner receipts, the hotel logs, the snapshots of stolen kisses in the park. I expected tears. I expected her hand to tremble. But Sarah was made of steel. She closed the folder calmly, took a slow sip of her latte, and looked me dead in the eye. "Monday the 12th, she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Julian told me he was at a networking event for angel investors in Soho. He came home smelling like cheap mints and guilt." She tapped a photo of them at the Italian restaurant. "And this dinner? $400. "Yeah," I nodded. My wife hates Italian food. That's how I knew. Sarah let out a dry, humorless laugh. That's funny, because Julian doesn't have $400. Not of his own money, anyway. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice so the baristas wouldn't hear. Julian tells people he's a venture capitalist. The truth? He hasn't closed a deal in 3 years. He's been living off a supplementary credit card attached to my business account. He's been whining and dining your wife with my hard-earned money. The realization hit me, like a punchline to a bad joke. Elena, my ambitious, status-obsessed wife, thought she was trading up. She thought she had snagged a wealthy tycoon. In reality, she was cheating on a successful architect with a broke con artist who was spending his wife's paycheck. It was pathetic. It was almost tragic. So, Sarah said, her eyes narrowing into slits. What do we do? Do I go home and throw his clothes on the lawn? Do you serve her papers tonight? I shook my head. If we confront them privately, they'll lie. They'll gaslight us. They'll make us feel like we're the crazy ones. We need to catch them when they feel safe, when they're arrogant. Sarah's expression shifted. A small, dangerous smile played on her lips. Publicly. Exactly, I said. I know where they're going tonight. The Crown Rooftop. It's a place to be seen. Sarah checked her watch. I'm a VIP member at the Crown. I can get us the best table in the house. A table with a view. She stood up, smoothing out her blazer. Mark, don't say a word to your wife. Let them have their date. Let them order the most expensive champagne on the menu. She paused, her eyes gleaming with cold fire. Because tonight, they aren't just paying with money. They're paying with everything they have. Fast forward to this evening. The performance Elena gave in our bedroom was worthy of an Academy Award. She was fluttering around the room, stressed about this alleged last-minute meeting, but I noticed a detail she couldn't hide. She wasn't preparing for a battle with a difficult client. She was preparing for a seduction. She pulled the red dress out of the back of the closet. It was a stunning, backless number I had bought her for her birthday last year. Back then, she had scoffed, telling me it was too flashy and inappropriate for dinner with her husband. Yet tonight, apparently, it was the perfect business casual attire for a rooftop negotiation. Watching her zip it up, smoothing the fabric over her hips while humming a soft tune, made my stomach turn. I lay in bed, propped up against a mountain of pillows, committing fully to my role. I let out a rough, convincing cough and rubbed my temples theatrically. I think I'm coming down with something, Nell. I groaned, making my voice sound weak and scratchy. I'm just going to knock back some NyQuil and pass out early. You go handle the client. Elena didn't even pretend to be concerned. In fact, I saw a flash of relief wash over her face in the vanity mirror. Oh, poor baby, she said, leaning down to give me a quick, performative peck on the cheek. Her perfume, something new and floral, filled my nose. Don't wait up. This guy is notoriously difficult. It might be a late one. Good luck? I whispered. The moment the front door clicked shut and I heard the elevator ding in the hallway, I threw off the duvet. The sick, tired husband vanished instantly. My energy spiked. I walked over to the window and watched her get into the Uber waiting downstairs. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sarah. She picked up on the first ring. She's in the car, I said, walking toward my closet where my best charcoal suit was waiting. She's wearing a red dress. You can't miss her. Perfect. Sarah's voice came through the speaker, crisp and icy. Julian just left. He told me he was meeting a group of angel investors from Silicon Valley. He was wearing the cufflinks I gave him for our anniversary. I paused, buttoning my shirt, feeling a strange camaraderie with this woman I had only met once. We were both watching the people we love dress up in our gifts to impress someone else. I'll meet you in the lobby in 20 minutes, I told her. It's showtime. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to a throne room. When the door slid open, the noise of the city below was replaced by the low hum of jazz and the clinking of crystal glasses. The Crown Rooftop Bar isn't just a bar, it's a statement. With a 360-degree view of the Manhattan skyline, it's the kind of place people go to feel important. Tonight, however, the most important people in the room weren't the celebrities in the VIP section. It was us. I met Sarah by the hostess stand. If Elena looked good in red, Sarah looked lethal in black. She was wearing a sleek, floor-length gown that managed to be both elegant and intimidating. It was a kind of dress you wear to a funeral, or in this case, the execution of two marriages. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of hesitation. "Ready," I replied, adjusting my cufflinks. Because Sarah was a top-tier member at the club, the maitre d' greeted her by name and whisked us past the line of people waiting for a table. We didn't want a secluded booth in the back. No, Sarah had requested a specific spot, a prime corner table, raised slightly on a platform. It offered a panoramic view of the Empire State Building to my left, but more importantly, it gave us a direct line of sight to the elevators. Anyone walking into the bar had to pass right by us. We were the gatekeepers. We sat down, settling into the plush velvet chairs. The air was crisp, but the outdoor heaters kept the chill at bay. "Champagne?" Sarah told the waiter without looking at the menu. "The vintage Dom Perignon. And put it on the Sterling family account." She shot me a small, conspiratorial smirk. Technically, Julian thinks this account is his emergency fund. I think this qualifies as an emergency, don't you? I couldn't help but smile. Absolutely. We sat there, sipping $300 champagne, looking like a power couple enjoying a night out. To an outsider, we looked perfect. But beneath the surface, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every time the elevator dinged, my stomach dropped. I was about to blow up my entire life, and I was doing it with a woman I had known for less than 24 hours. But looking at Sarah's calm, calculated profile against the city lights, I realized I wasn't afraid of losing Elena anymore. I was only afraid of letting her think she had won. It was 7 p.m. on the dot. The city lights below were just starting to sparkle, mimicking the stars we couldn't see through the smog. Suddenly, the phone sitting face up on the marble table buzzed aggressively. It was a vibration of a lie arriving right on schedule. I looked down. The screen illuminated with Elena's name. "Meeting a client at the hotel rooftop bar. Love you." I stared at the words, marveling at the sheer audacity of it. It was the best kind of lie, one wrapped in a layer of truth. She was telling me exactly where she was, banking on the fact that I was too trusting or too sick in bed to ever check up on her. She felt safe enough to give me the location because, in her mind, I was already a ghost of her life, present but invisible. I slid the phone across the table to Sarah. She read it without blinking, then picked up her own device. "Clockwork," she muttered. She turned her screen toward me. Julian had sent his dispatch a minute earlier. "Deep in talks with the investors, babe. Going to be a late night. Don't wait up." "The difference in their delusions is fascinating," Sarah observed, taking a slow sip of her drink. "Your wife pretends she's a hard-working professional meeting a demand. My husband pretends he's the master of the universe closing a deal. They're perfect for each other. Two narcissists building a castle out of playing cards." I picked up my phone to reply. My thumb hovered over keyboard. Part of me wanted to type, "I know," or "Look behind you," but I stopped. That would be too easy. It would end the game before the trap was sprung. I needed her to walk in here feeling confident. I needed her guard to be completely down. So I typed the lie she wanted to hear. "Good luck with the client. Make sure you bill him for the overtime. Rest well, honey." I hit send. I watched the delivered receipt pop up. Somewhere in the elevator shaft below us, Elena was reading that text, probably smiling, probably thinking she had pulled off the perfect crime. She had no idea that I was sitting less than 30 feet away from the table reserved under the name Mr. Julian Sterling. I wasn't just tracking her location. I was waiting at the finish line. The gentle chime of the elevator arrival sounded like a gavel hitting a judge's block. I stiffened in my chair, my eyes locking onto the brushed steel doors as they slid open. And there they were. Seeing the photos in a dossier is one thing. Seeing it in high definition, 20 feet away, is a completely different kind of torture. Elena stepped out first, the red dress hugging her silhouette in a way that was designed to turn heads. She wasn't walking with the brisk, professional stride she used when she was actually meeting clients. She was gliding. She looked radiant, alive, and utterly untroubled by conscience. Julian followed close behind, like a shark trailing a blood scent. He was wearing a navy suit that I knew for a fact Sarah had bought him for a cousin's wedding last summer. But it was the body language that really twisted the knife. There was zero professional distance. Julian's hand wasn't offering a handshake. It was resting possessively on the small of her back, his fingers splayed out against the red fabric of the dress I paid for. They looked like a billboard for a luxury lifestyle brand, beautiful, wealthy, and completely morally bankrupt. Elena threw her head back, laughing at something he whispered in her ear. It was a laugh I hadn't heard in years, light, flirtatious, and full of genuine excitement. That sound hurt more than the sight of them together. It was the sound of her giving him the best version of herself, the version she told me didn't exist anymore because she was too tired or too stressed from work. I started to rise from my seat, the primal instinct to confront them overwhelming my logic. I wanted to storm over there and wipe that smug grin off Julian's face. I wanted to scream, but a cold, manicured hand clamped down on my forearm. I looked at Sarah. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching them with the predatory stillness of a lioness in tall grass. She didn't blink. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "Sit down, Mark. Let them get comfortable. Let them order their drinks. I want them to feel safe. I want them to relax into the lie before we pull the rug out." I exhaled slowly, forcing my muscles to relax, and sank back into the velvet chair. She was right. We didn't just want to catch them. We wanted to destroy the fantasy they had built. We watched as the hostess led them to a secluded table near the edge of the terrace. A table that was perfectly visible from our vantage point, but far enough away that they hadn't spotted us yet. The trap was set. We waited exactly 7 minutes. That's how long it took a waiter to arrive at their table, take their order, a bottle of Pinot Noir in the seafood tower, if my lip reading was accurate, and disappear back into the crowd. Elena and Julian were now alone in their little bubble of deceit. They leaned in across the candlelight, their faces inches apart. Julian reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Elena's ear, a gesture so tender it made my skin crawl. They looked like the protagonists of a romantic comedy. Completely unaware, they were actually the villains in a revenge thriller. Sarah finished her champagne in one smooth swallow and set the crystal flute down on the table with a decisive clink. "It's time," she said. We stood up in unison. I adjusted my jacket, ensuring everything was perfect. My heart was pounding against my ribs, not out of fear, but out of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. It felt like standing on the edge of a diving board, looking down at the water, knowing there was no turning back. We began the walk. It was a slow, deliberate march across the rooftop terrace. We didn't rush. We navigated through the maze of tables and laughing patrons like predators stalking prey. The music seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the rushing blood in my ears. As we got closer, I could hear their voices. "I'm just glad we finally have a night to ourselves," Elena was saying, her voice dripping with affection. "Mark has been so suffocating lately. It's like living with a roommate, not a husband." "I know the feeling," Julian replied, his voice smooth and practiced. "Sarah's consumed by her work. She doesn't understand me like you do, babe. She doesn't see the vision." I almost laughed out loud. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He was complaining about his wife not seeing his vision, while spending her money to cheat on her. And Elena was complaining about me being her roommate, while I was currently paying a mortgage on a roof over her head. We stopped about 5 feet away from their table. They were so engrossed in their mutual pity party and flirtation that they didn't even notice 2 shadows falling over their table. They raised their water glasses for a toast. "To us," Julian said. "To the future," Elena smiled. I cleared my throat. It wasn't a loud noise, but in that intimate space, it sounded like a gunshot. "I wouldn't drink to that future if I were you," I said calmly. The glass froze halfway to Elena's lips. The smile didn't just fade from her face. It vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unbridled terror as she slowly turned her head and locked eyes with me. But the real shock came a split second later, when her eyes drifted to the woman standing next to me. For a solid 3 seconds, nobody moved. It was as if time itself had decided to pause and admire the sheer catastrophe unfolding at table 14. Elena stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the color draining from her face so fast she looked like a wax figure. The confident, radiant woman from moments ago had disintegrated. In her place sat a terrified girl caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Except the jar was another woman's husband, and the kitchen was a crowded rooftop bar in Manhattan. "Mark," she squeaked. It was barely a whisper, a strangled sound that clawed its way out her throat. She gripped the stem of her wine glass so hard I thought it would snap in her hand. What are you doing here?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I leaned in slightly, rested my knuckles on the white tablecloth, right next to the breadbasket. "I'm just checking in on the meeting. Elena," I said, my voice dangerously level. I wanted to make sure the client was satisfied. Although, judging by the way his hand was just on your leg, I'd say negotiations are going well. Julian, realizing the romantic bubble had burst, puffed up his chest in a pathetic attempt at alpha male dominance. He didn't know who I was yet. Not really. He just saw an intruder. "Excuse me, buddy," Julian barked, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads at nearby tables. "We're in the middle of a private conversation here. Do you mind?" That was the moment Sarah stepped out from behind my shadow. If Elena looked terrified, Julian looked like he had just seen the ghost of Christmas future. His arrogance evaporated instantly. His jaw actually dropped. He scrambled to stand up, knocking his fork onto the floor with a loud clang. "Sarah?" he stammered, his eyes darting frantically between me and her. "Babe, this isn't—" "I can explain." Sarah didn't even blink. She looked at him with the kind of detachment a scientist has when observing a bug under a microscope. "Sit down, Julian," she ordered. Her tone wasn't angry. It was authoritative. It was the voice she used in boardrooms to fire incompetent executives. Julian sat. She turned her gaze to the table, sweeping over the expensive wine and the appetizers. Then she looked straight at him, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "Julian," she said, gesturing to me with an elegant sweep of her hand, "I'd like you to meet Mark. He's the husband of your new client." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. The realization hit both of them at the same time. They looked at each other, then at us. They weren't just caught, they were outmaneuvered. The two people they thought were stupid, blind, and disposable were standing over them, holding all the cards. Elena was the first to try and salvage the wreckage. It was a reflex, really, like a drowning person thrashing in water. She smoothed her dress, cleared her throat, and put on her best professional face, though her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. "Mark, you're making a scene," she hissed, trying to regain control. "This isn't what it looks like. Mr. Sterling and I were just discussing a potential partnership. He's looking to invest in the waterfront project. I didn't want to worry you with the details until it was finalized." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A partnership? Is that what we're calling it now? Is that what you were discussing at Luciano's last week over a $400 dinner? Or in the back seat of the car that still smells like his cologne?" Elena's mouth snapped shut. The blood drained from her face as she realized I knew everything. The details I just dropped were precise strikes, tearing through her flimsy narrative. Then it was Sarah's turn. She didn't look at Elena. She kept her eyes laser-focused on her husband. Julian was shrinking in his seat, looking smaller by the second. "So, Julian," Sarah said, her voice deceptively light, "is this the angel investor meeting? Or was it the Silicon Valley Tech Summit? I lose track of which lie you're using on which day." "Sarah, please," Julian begged, his voice cracking. "Let's talk about this at home. I can explain everything." "Oh, we're done talking, Julian," Sarah interrupted, pulling her phone out of her clutch. "And there is no home to go back to. I had the locks changed an hour ago. Your bags are currently sitting with the doorman at the lobby of our building. I hope you pack warm clothes. It's getting chilly tonight." Julian turned pale, but Sarah wasn't finished. She turned to Elena, offering her a pitying smile. "And just so you know, honey," Sarah said to my wife, "I hope you brought your own wallet tonight, because the wealthy investor you're trying to seduce, he's unemployed. He hasn't made a dime in 3 years. That Platinum Amex he likes to flash around? It's a supplementary card on my account. She tapped her phone screen once. And as of right now, that card has been deactivated. The look on Elena's face was priceless. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide, searching for denial. She had risked her marriage, her reputation, and her comfortable life for a man she thought was a tycoon, only to find out he was a broke-con artist living on an allowance. The realization hit her harder than the betrayal itself. She hadn't just been caught, she had been scammed. The air around table 14 had become toxic. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was broken only by the sound of nearby laughter from people who were having much better nights than Julian and Elena. But soon, even the neighboring tables went quiet. Human beings are instinctively drawn to disaster, and right now, we were the biggest train wreck in Manhattan. Elena turned on Julian so fast, it would have given anyone else whiplash. The adoration in her eyes vanished, replaced by a look of sheer disgust. "Is that true?" she demanded, her voice rising an octave, abandoning all pretense of a whisper. "You told me you owned the venture firm. You told me you were financing the waterfront project yourself." Julian was sweating profusely now. He dabbed his forehead with a cloth napkin, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "Elena, babe, it's complicated. Assets are tied up in liquidations and offshore." "He's lying," Sarah cut in, leaning back and crossing her arms. She looked like a queen watching a jester try to juggle knives. "He manages nothing. He plays golf on Tuesdays and lies to women on Thursdays. That's his portfolio." Elena looked like she was going to be sick. The fantasy was dead. The rich, exciting life she thought she was trading up for was a mirage. And then, as the reality set in, she did exactly what I knew she would do. She pivoted. She turned her desperate, tear-filled eyes toward me. She reached out a hand, trying to grab my sleeve, but I took a smooth step back, out of reach. "Mark," she choked out, the tears starting to flow freely now. Tears of regret, not for hurting me, but for getting caught on the losing side. "Mark, please. I didn't know. He manipulated me. I was confused. Let's just go home. We can talk about this. I can fix this." I looked down at her. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of memories, vacations, arguments, and laughter. I looked for a spark of sympathy in my chest, but I found nothing. Just a vast, cool emptiness. "There is no home for us, Elena," I said, my voice steady enough to carve stone. "I packed my bags 3 hours ago. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. And as for the apartment, it's in my name. I'll be changing the locks tomorrow morning before you even wake up from whatever hangover this night gives you." "You can't do that," she cried, panic setting in. "Watch me," I replied. "You wanted a new life. Elena, you wanted excitement? You wanted a man who takes risks? Well, congratulations. You're sitting next to him. You two deserve each other." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the key to our apartment, and dropped it onto the table next to the untouched seafood tower. It landed with a heavy thud. "I left your spare key at the front desk downstairs." I lied. I hadn't left for anything, but it sounded good. "Figure it out. Just don't come knocking on my door." I nodded to Sarah. "Shall we?" "We shall," Sarah said. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and didn't even look back at her husband. We turned our backs on the chaos. Behind us, the whispers of the crowd grew louder, and I could hear the distinct sound of Elena and Julian starting to scream at each other. It was the sweetest symphony I had ever heard. Walking away from your marriage is supposed to be the hardest thing you ever do. It's supposed to be filled with hesitation, with one last look over your shoulder, with the heavy weight of what-ifs dragging at your heels. But as I turned my back on table 14, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was as if I'd been carrying a backpack full of stones up a mountain, and someone had finally cut the straps. Sarah was right beside me. We didn't run. We didn't rush. We walked with a rhythmic, synchronized gait of two people who had just successfully defused a bomb and were clearing the blast zone. Behind us, the polite murmurs of the rooftop bar had completely evaporated, replaced by the rising crescendo of a public meltdown. I didn't need to turn around and know what was happening. I could hear it. You told me you were a partner at the firm. Elena's voice cracked through the air, shrill and desperate. She wasn't fighting for us anymore. She was fighting for her dignity, and she was losing. Lower your voice, Elena. Julian hissed back, though his panic was making him loud too. My card is it's a banking error. I can fix this. Your wife just said she pays for everything. Excuse me, sir. A waiter's voice cut in, firm and unamused. The card on file has been declined. We're going to need another form of payment for the champagne and the tower. It's $450. I caught Sarah's eye as we reached the elevator bank. She didn't smile, but her eyebrow quirked upward just a fraction of an inch. It was a subtle acknowledgement of a perfect checkmate. We pressed a button, and the brushed steel door slid open instantly, welcoming us into the quiet safety of the car. As we turned to face the doors closing, I got one last glimpse of the carnage. Julian was patting his pockets frantically, looking like a man drowning on dry land. Elena was sitting with her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The red dress, the one she wore to impress her rich lover, now just looked like a costume for a play that had been canceled mid-performance. The door slid shut, cutting off the noise of their argument like a guillotine. The silence in the elevator was profound. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy with adrenaline. I leaned back against the mirrored wall and let out a long, shaky breath I felt like I'd been holding since I got into the taxi an hour ago. "You okay?" Sarah asked, her voice soft now that the performance was over. "No," I admitted honestly, "but I will be." "Good," she said, staring at the floor numbers ticking down. Because that was a masterpiece. We walked out of the hotel lobby and into the cool New York night. The air tasted different, cleaner, sharper. We didn't celebrate. We didn't go for a victory drink. We simply stood on the curb, two strangers connected by a singular moment of devastating truth. We had left them in ruins, not with violence, but by simply letting them be exactly who they were. And as I hailed a cab to take me to my temporary hotel, I realized the best revenge wasn't destroying them. It was letting them destroy each other. The months that followed that night on the rooftop weren't filled with the cinematic drama of the confrontation. They were filled with the cold, sterile silence of lawyers' offices and the scratching of pens on legal documents. But in its own way, this part was just as satisfying. I didn't go back to the apartment. I had my attorney, a man named David who charged $500 an hour and was worth every cent, handle the eviction notice. Elena tried to fight, of course. Panic makes people litigious. She demanded the apartment. She demanded spousal support. She demanded a share of my firm's future earnings. She was grasping at straws, trying to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, but she had forgotten one tiny, crucial detail from 10 years ago. Before we got married, back when I was just starting my firm, and had more debt than assets, my father had insisted we sign a prenuptial agreement. Elena had signed it laughing, calling it unromantic, but unnecessary because she loved me for me. That document had an infidelity clause, a very specific, very brutal infidelity clause. When her lawyer sat down across from us in the conference room, blustering about Elena's emotional distress, David simply slid the PI's report and the signed prenup across the mahogany table. "Your client was cohabitating with another man while married," David said calmly, "and we have high-definition proof of the affair. According to Section 4, Paragraph B, she leaves the marriage with exactly what she came in with, which, if I'm looking at these financials correctly, is a leased BMW and a maxed-out credit card." The color drained from Elena's face. The fight went out of her instantly. Meanwhile, Sarah was scorching the earth on her side of the city. I heard through the grapevine that she didn't just divorce Julian. She obliterated him legally. Since he had signed documents acknowledging his lack of contribution to her company, he walked away with nothing. No settlement, no alimony, just his clothes and his ego. Predictably, once the money dried up, the romance between Elena and Julian evaporated. Julian, realizing Elena wasn't the rich sugar mama he hoped for, ghosted her within a week. About 2 months after the papers were finalized, Elena tried one last Hail Mary. She showed up at my office, looking thinner, tired, and wearing old clothes. She cried. She told me Julian was a mistake. She told me she missed her best friend. I was lost, Mark, she sobbed. I just want to come home. I looked at her, standing in the lobby of the building I designed, and felt nothing, no anger, no love, just the indifference you feel for a stranger on the subway. You are home. Elena, I said, checking my watch. You're in the reality you created. You wanted excitement? You wanted to gamble? Well, the house always wins. And you just lost everything. I turned to security. Please escort Ms. Vance out. She doesn't have an appointment. Watching the security guard gently guide her toward the revolving doors was the final closure I needed. The ink was dry. The chapter was closed. They say time heals all wounds, but I think that's a cliche people use to avoid doing the hard work. Time doesn't heal you. Action heals you. Decisions heal you. And the decision to walk away from that table at the Crown Rooftop Bar was the single healthiest choice I ever made. It's been exactly 1 year since that night. I was sitting in a small industrial-style coffee shop in Dumbo, Brooklyn, staring at a set of blueprints for a new public library my firm was designing. The morning sun was streaming through the window, warming the oak table. I wasn't checking my phone for texts. I wasn't worrying about where my wife was or who she was with. My mind was quiet. It was peaceful. That looks like a load-bearing wall you're about to remove. I looked up, startled, to see a familiar face smiling down at me. It was Sarah. She looked incredible. Not in the vengeful, dressed to kill way she had that night at the hotel, but in a softer, more genuine way. The tension that used to live in her shoulders was gone. She was holding a matcha latte and wearing a casual trench coat. We hadn't become a couple. Real life isn't a Hallmark movie where trauma instantly breeds romance, but we had become something just as valuable. We were friends. We were survivors of the same shipwreck who had managed to swim to the same island. It is a load-bearing wall. I smiled, pulling out a chair for her. But sometimes, Sarah, you have to knock down the old structures to build something that actually lets the light in. She sat down, laughing softly. You're absolutely right. My company just hit its highest quarter in 5 years. Turns out, it's amazing how much money you save when you aren't supporting a deadbeat husband. We sat there for an hour, talking about work, travel, and the future. We didn't mention Elena or Julian once. They were ghosts, fading footnotes in the biographies of our lives. They were the tuition we paid to learn what we really deserved. As I walked out of that cafe and looked at the Manhattan skyline across the river, I realized something profound. I used to be terrified of being alone. I stayed in a marriage that made me feel small, because I was afraid of the silence of an empty apartment. But standing there, breathing in the cold city air, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. If you're listening to this story and you feel stuck or betrayed or afraid to leave because of the unknown, let this be your sign. The unknown isn't scary. The unknown is where your new life is waiting for you. Sometimes the best thing you can do is let the wrong people go, so the right people, including the best version of yourself, can finally find you. This has been Inspiration Seeker. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe in second chances and the power of self-respect, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Until next time, keep seeking your truth.